have all of you here and to be hosting this members briefing with Deutsche Bank of America's Foundation, Hive Digital Media Learning Fund in the New York Community Trust, the New York City Youth Funders, and the New York City Workforce Funders, and the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. A special thanks to Hollis Hedrick for coordinating this event, which I cannot see into the future, but I have been privy to the planning, and I think that we're going to learn a lot, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say. I am going to hand it over to Megan McAllister, who is our moderator for the day. Megan is the program officer at the Altman Foundation. She is awesome, and she is going to get us going. Oh, and please, we're recording this. So please, all the speakers obviously can speak into their microphones. But when we get to Q&A portion, we'll have a microphone going around, and hopefully speak into the microphone going on.
Okay.
Are we using the PNY event? Hashtag PNY event. We are live streaming.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. I am really excited. Is this working? Do we know? Does it sound like it's working?
It's on. The microphones, they are picking up sound, but they're not broadcasting to the room. Is that correct?
Okay. Okay.
But it doesn't have to be heard.
Okay, great. So welcome. I'm really excited to be here and to begin a conversation among New York City funders about the potential for digital badges, both to expand opportunities for youth and adults here in the city, and to document all kinds of learning that is taking place both inside and outside formal educational institutions. And we have an incredible group of speakers here today to sort of tell us what's going on in that regard around the country. We have Carla Casili, who's the Director of Design and Practice at the Badge Alliance, which is based in California. We have Jennifer Humke, who's a Program Officer for Digital Media and Learning at the MacArthur Foundation. We have Halima Johnson, who's the Digital Education Coordinator at the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum. And we have Tawa Mitchell, who until very, very recently was the Director of Educational Policy and Partnerships in the office of Rahm Emanuel, the Mayor of the City of Chicago. And we're going to start with Carla, but before we do that, I just want to say that today's meeting builds on two briefings last year about digital media and learning that were organized by our co-sponsors. A briefing last June served as an introduction to the field of digital media and learning and talked about how youth use digital media in their daily lives, how they are creating, curating, and remixing media, and how massive open online courses, or MOOCs, are being used in higher education. Last September, we had a second briefing that focused on developing the workforce for New York's tech sector, which is the fastest growing tech sector in the country. We talked about some of the strengths and weaknesses of the current educational pipeline in that regard and strategies for improvement. There are descriptions and blogs about both of those sessions on the PNY website if anybody wants to access those. Today we're going to try to cover the following. We're going to try to go through the basics of digital badges as well as their potential. We're going to talk about how foundations can stay abreast of developments in the digital media learning world generally. We're going to talk about how organizations like the Educational Testing Service, Blackboard, and Cities of Learning are using badges already to recognize achievement in the workplace, in schools, and in non-traditional settings. And we're going to talk about how cities and school districts are using badges to recognize learning, as well as how programs and nonprofits are using digital badges to document skills and achievements in their programs. So as I said, we are going to begin with Carla. The format for today is that each of our speakers is going to introduce themselves, talk about who they are, what they do, tell us how digital badges fit into their work. And then after all the speakers have given introductory remarks, we're going to have lots of time for question and answers, which I'm sure there will be. We are going to begin with Carla doing a brief overview of what a badge is to define our terms. And if folks have some clarifying questions after that, we'll pause briefly for those and then move through the rest of the speakers and take Q&A at the end. So Carla, Can you take it away?
Yep, I can. Thanks, everybody. And I'm very happy to be here. Again, my name is Carla Casili, and I am with the Badge Alliance. We are actually kind of a virtual organization at this point, so we have people all over the place. So while I'm based in California, we actually have people who are based in Maine, in DC, in Chicago. I mentioned that like it's its own state. In Illinois. And a variety of other areas. And the Badge Alliance is kind of an outgrowth of the work that had happened, that had begun at Mozilla. So I'm going to get to the Badge Alliance a little bit later, but I just wanted to give a little orientation about who I am and where I fit into that role. How badges play a role in my life. They've been a significant area of my life for the last 3 years. So I was the third person on the Open Badges team at Mozilla. So it had, what I want to do is actually we're going to move to a video that's going to give you a brief encapsulation of what an Open Badge is. Then I'm actually going to move to a PowerPoint. I know everybody loves those. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what Open Badges are after we see this. But this is such a great encapsulation, we thought we'd show this first.
Learning today happens anywhere and everywhere. It happens in a variety of environments, different social contexts, and in a multitude of media. We can no longer think of learning in one way. Our education system faces great challenges in engaging students, keeping pace with technological change, teaching 21st century skills, and creating meaningful assessments of our learning. How do we recognize and value the way we learn today? What if we use badges? What is a badge? A badge is an online representation of a skill or achievement we learn. They've been used in gaming and online spaces to motivate behavior, recognize achievement, and establish credibility. What if we used badges for learning? Badges could be created or issued by anyone: schools, online spaces, cultural and civic institutions, community and professional organizations, to represent a limitless set of skills, achievements, and knowledge. Badges could be earned by anyone completing programs or projects or demonstrating specific knowledge, skills, and abilities. Badges could be shared on websites or blogs, social media profiles, online portfolios, and resumes, leading to real opportunities like connecting with potential collaborators, earning skill credit, or getting a job. Mozilla's Open Badges infrastructure provides the software and open technical standard for everyone to earn, issue, and display badges across various contexts, ensuring that everyone gets recognition for the learning that happens anywhere and shares it in the places that matter. So what do badges mean for learning? Badges let us see that learning goes beyond classrooms. Skills like creativity and collaboration and passionate interests become as important as subjects like math and science. Badges show our learning is more than a collection of test scores and grades, but are learning pathways rich with detail and information. This allows learners to go their own learning, teachers to better engage students, and employers to find the unique talents and skill sets they need. Badges cultivate social and connected learning, where learning happens through sharing. They let learning be recognized and transferred across different spaces and learning environments. Badges make learning more adaptable to change and open to innovation. And most importantly, badges make learning a lifelong pursuit. By letting us recognize the learning that happens anywhere and share it in the places that matter, badges cultivate values of openness, sharing, and innovation in learning today.
So what we're going to do is move to the PowerPoint, but essentially the PowerPoint is going to be me talking about kind of exactly what you've just seen and stepping through how badges come into being and why they're meaningful and useful. And what exactly a badge is. So I'll be talking about kind of the software that underpins a badge, and then conceptually why you might want to issue or create badges. Let's make sure we use that the right way. So as I mentioned, that the Badge Alliance is actually an outgrowth of Mozilla Open Badges, and the core team who were the basis of the Open Badges at Mozilla have now moved to the Badge Alliance. The Badge Alliance, as I mentioned, I will get to later on, so I want to move on beyond that. But a question that was raised kind of immediately when someone entered the room, they asked, how did badges come into being? About 4 years ago, we have MozFest every year. So Mozilla has a festival where they invite people to approach a specific topic. And 4 years ago, we had the MozFest that was Learning Freedom in the Web. And at that point, we asked ourselves, let's start thinking about, let's rethink education, or let's rethink learning. And that was how we got to the idea of badges. And we said, what if we were able to introduce the affordances that the web provides in a kind of a digital format, so that learning that was happening anywhere would actually be able to be captured. And that's how we got to the idea of open badges. And so it's essentially a reimagined credentials for a new culture of learning. So that was what we asked ourselves. Again, what are some of the things that when go into an open badge? So we wanted to make sure that they were interoperable. So the words that you see on the screen right there are essential elements to what constitutes an open badge. We want to make sure they're interoperable, and what that means, pretty large word, but what it means essentially is that you can take your learning wherever it happens and you can move it somewhere else. So it's not necessarily siloed in one place. And that's one of the primary aspects that we wanted to address through open badges. So that idea of transferable is also very important. So what they do, they act as digital representations of a whole variety of things. So we have a whole bunch of words on that screen right there. And it's really important to realize that badges can be used for a lot of different representations. So when we talk about badges, we're talking about really something that has taken place that the badge is a representation of. So this is highlighting the words digital and representation there. Doesn't mean that the actual activity needs to have taken place online. Instead, what this means is that the representation is online so that it can be shared. What we're aiming for with open badges is really the idea of a personal social currency, which means that badges can be used as kind of a living transcript. So all the badges that you're earning throughout your life, you're actually collecting into a backpack. That is actually not mentioned in any of these slides, but you're collecting into a backpack. And that means you have control and ownership over those badges. So again, we're starting to make the distinction that the earner is really at the center of this entire experience. Shifting a little bit from the idea of the issuers having control or specific organizations having control over what's meaningful, the earner makes choices about what's meaningful to them. What happened to that slide? And they act, as I mentioned, as representations of those things. And it's important to realize that a lot of times we'll talk about badges and we'll say, well, you can earn this badge, you can earn this badge. But what we're really saying is you can have this experience, and this is the result that will actually show that you had this experience. So here's a documentation of that experience. They can do all kinds of things, represent things like hard and soft skills. They can start to introduce different forms of assessment into the world. So instead of having just expert-based assessment, we can also start to introduce peer assessment. What does it mean for a peer to start issuing someone else a badge? And then also the idea of lifelong learning, that recognizing that people don't necessarily stop learning the minute they walk out of some accredited organization. Instead, there's continuous learning. And also taking into account that people don't necessarily have the traditional learning arc that we all think about. They don't necessarily go from point A to point B in order to get to point C. Sometimes they go to Q first. Sometimes they go to F and before they get to where they're headed. So recognizing that badges actually allow you to encompass all of that and start to look at it almost like a personal diary. These are the things that I have accomplished. What they do too is they also convey experience to key stakeholders. And I wrote there like potential employers, but they can communicate to lots of different audiences. They can communicate personally. They can communicate to you as the earner. They can communicate to higher ed. They can communicate to social environments. So there are many, many ways that they actually communicate. And again, having the earner make that choice about to whom they're sharing this information and where that information gets communicated. Again, what you saw in the video is that they map learning pathways, so they connect formal and informal learning. And I know this is a huge area of interest in lots of different areas, and I'm sure Todd was going to talk a little bit about this too, is recognizing that people are learning all over the place. The web has caused kind of an explosion of learning to happen, and you don't necessarily get credit for that anywhere. This is what we essentially created a tool to allow that recognition to occur. So how do we get there? What's the thing? What's the thing that actually makes all this happen? It's actually a universal standard, and it's a universal standard of metadata. And what that means is you're actually looking at real code there. That's code taken directly from our GitHub account. And metadata is essentially information about information. But what's happening here is I was recently at a conference, and one of the people who was presenting with me also mentioned that badges were a great vessel, that open badges were a vessel. And I thought that was such a brilliant metaphor, because really that's what they are. They hold information. And what they do is they prompt the issuing organization or the individual who's creating the badge to supply specific information. And because we ask them to supply that information, that's what brings their interoperability. That's what makes them move from one place to another. Because when anybody ever clicks on an open badge, they're going to get the exact same prompt. So you're going to know this open badge has, and we'll actually move to the next screen. This is what it's going to have. It's going to have the badge name. It's going to have the badge URL, which is essentially pointing to a description of the badge. What's this badge about? And then the criteria. So what this does is it makes your assessment criteria transparent. Now someone's going to be able to look at what it was you were looking at or thinking about when you created this badge. It also includes the badge image, who the issuing organization is, and there are lots of questions that arise about validity and credibility, and that's where you get some of that being answered within the actual content of the badge itself. And then the issue date, was it issued on a certain day or time, and that relates to further down the expiration date. Badges can expire. So if you feel like there are places where certain kinds of knowledge actually become stale, then you can actually include that in the badge. And then I'll also jump down to the evidence URL here because this is really important. And when we talk about open badges, what we're really talking about is evidence-based micro-credentialing. And what that means is each badge, by the way, is personalized. So when I earn a badge, it's only for Carla. And while there are lots of people who are earning badges, there would be a badge for Jen and a badge for Tawa and a badge for Halima. When you click on the badge for me, my evidence URL, if evidence is attached to that badge, then it's my evidence. So you get to actually see what I did in order to earn that badge, which is a very different experience than looking necessarily at someone's transcript and saying like, I have a rough idea of what happened within here, or relying on tacit assumptions about, well, they came from a good school or they've gone to a good school, so I have a pretty good understanding of what they're doing. That evidence URL is one of the distinguishing factors of what defines an open badge. So right now we have about 14,000 issuers. We have about 60,000 Mozilla backpacks. I mentioned that a little earlier. The backpack is where you actually collect all of your badges and then choose to make them public. Backpacks actually, all your badges default to private within the backpack, currently in the Mozilla backpack. We will eventually what we call federate the backpack. That's a big technical term. Essentially means there'll be lots of different providers who will provide backpacks. Right now we have about 2 million badges that people have said that they will be issuing over the course of this year. So I don't know if they'll be talking about the Clinton Global Initiative at all, but we're actually going to be upping how many badges we had. We said that we would have 2 million badges, 2 million better futures over the course of 3 years. We hit it in the course of 1 year, so we're re-upping, and now we're going for about 10 million. So over the course of 3 years, and that's really aiming to do a whole bunch of things, not just in the world of education, but also in the world of workforce. So recognizing that there are all these ways that badges are being used for different constituencies, and we want to acknowledge that. And that is going to bring me to conclusion of the PowerPoint. I'm wondering if we want to pause for just a few minutes and have some questions.
Yes. So clarifying questions.
I was just going to ask Carla to clarify. We sometimes talk about them as digital badges, sort of what the difference is between a digital badge and an open badge and why we use that interchangeably or not.
So thanks.
Good for both terms.
Yep, so thank you so much for mentioning that. Yep, you'll hear both terms today. Digital badges are representations of the same concept. They're kind of the umbrella term that open badges fall into. Open badges are important because there's not only it's open source software underpinning the badge, they're also the concept of the open ethos that goes along with them. So that concept of interoperability that defines the badge is part of an open badge, not necessarily part of a digital badge. Also the idea that badges can be, that they're owned by the earner, that's also a distinguishing factor between an open badge and a digital badge. So the primary underlying goal of an open badge is really to put the earner, the badge earner, and sometimes you'll hear earner / learner at the center of that badge ecosystem so that they're making conscious choices about which badges they're earning. And that's where we start to get that interesting parallel or conversation between informal learning and formal learning, where informal, there's a lot of option and choice that can be made, and formal, there's not a whole lot of options and choice that can necessarily be made. The other thing that the video mentioned, which I really like very much, is the idea that you can start to scaffold off of information, so badges can start to build off of one another. So when you start to see that concept of open becomes really important in the backpack, and when someone shares an open badge, Because then if an organization looks at all the badges that someone has, they can say, oh, well, you already have all this expertise. We can build off of that. You don't necessarily need to go over all of those things where you have those skills and competencies or have achieved different things. Instead, we're going to scaffold off of that. We can actually now go much higher in what it is we're attempting to do, or move much farther beyond where we were before.
And would it be fair to say also that open badges have a set of standards that are common across them where all digital media badges do not?
Yes, yes, very much so. So those prompts that you saw earlier, the metadata spec, that's really our universal standard. That is the essence of an open badge. And if it doesn't have those things, and if it's not interoperable or can't move it from one place to another easily, then it's not an open badge, it's a digital badge.
Questions?
So that's a great question. How many badges are currently available for people to earn? And the short answer is we think it's in the millions. We know. So actually, let me restate that. We think about in several millions have been earned. The total number of badges available is kind of an unknown for us because we are open source. This is where things start to get very interesting because issuing organizations can essentially align with the open badges standard, and they don't necessarily need to check in with us. So because of that, there are lots of organizations that we are finding out about through the Badge Alliance now who are like, yeah, we're off and running, and we are in China and we're introducing a master's program and we're offering a badge for that. And it's only if someone actually contacts someone within the Badge Alliance team or within the larger community that we find out about it. So we are aiming to address that in a future iteration through directory.
Allison?
Can you define what you mean by track? So there are a lot of questions about privacy that surround badges, and because of who Mozilla is as an organization, we don't do a lot of tracking. That said, there's a very strong amount of interest in tracking the data that comes out of badges, and I'm sure this is something that Tawa will talk about. So I'm just going to pause that there and let her talk about that one.
Mariana?
So badges right now, a lot of them, a significant number of them are kind of competency based. Are you capable of doing this or not capable of doing this? That said, there are all kinds of, what badges do is they start to surface the assessment question, right? What exactly are you assessing and how? And because they do that, then they start to introduce questions like, are you credit hour based? And if you're credit hour based, then you can't necessarily earn this badge. We are seeing huge movement, and when I say we, I'm talking about the Badge Alliance, a huge movement towards competency-based education and mastery-based education, and badges fit in very, very well with that. I will mention today we had a community call where Dr. Bernard Bullis from Concordia University in Wisconsin, and they are actually very serious about developing a master's program where you would be entirely badged. So when you came out of that degree program, excuse me, you would have a series of badges. And he talked about 10 different areas that they were covering, and one of them was that the courses and the idea of courses start to be called into question even when you start to move to badges. The courses themselves, there might be 6 badges per course, and as soon as you earn that badge, you could then share that publicly. So that changes the playing field of like, well, I had to complete this course. Now you're talking about kind of more granular skills and more foundational skills, and that allows you to start to display yourself in different ways and talk about yourself in different presentations.
So I'm going to ask now that we move on, and I'm sure there's going to be lots more questions, but I think more will be revealed by the rest of our speakers. So next we're going to go to Jennifer Humke of the MacArthur Foundation.
So should I be able to get to my slideshow? Okay. I also have a slide deck. And I should mention that when I'm going to often refer to digital badges. And when I refer to digital badges, I'm actually talking about open badges. the work that MacArthur supports is all about supporting the open standard. So my name is Jen Humke, and I'm a program officer at the MacArthur Foundation in Chicago in the Digital Media and Learning Program. And the Digital Media and Learning Program is about 10 years old. We've invested about $150 million to reimagine the future of learning to meet the needs of kids growing up in the digital age. And I've been asked today to talk a little bit about how MacArthur has found itself at the center of the conversation about badges and why we're so deeply investing in badges. And it's actually kind of a long and meandering story because it's about the evolution of our grant making over the last 10 years. But I'm going to start from the beginning and be very quick. I'm going to try to do this in 10 minutes and tell you the story about how we got to where we are right now and give you an update about what the exciting things are that are going on in the badge world. So MacArthur, since its inception in the late 70s, has always invested in education. We started investing exclusively in Chicago public schools, doing sort of very traditional education reform work, and we weren't really moving the needle, so our board said, we need to move on from that. We moved on to a national initiative that was also very much about traditional education reform, and we were in 3 districts, and I think over the course of the first couple of years, we cycled through 12 different district leaders, and our board said, you got to take a step back and look to the horizon because this is not working for us. And this was a little over 10 years ago. So we took a step back, we looked to the horizon, we saw that there were a lot of kids out there online, and we also noticed that digital technologies were changing all kinds of industries, but it wasn't clear how they were changing education, and we wanted to better understand why. So we launched the Digital Media and Learning Initiative. It really started out as an exploration of how digital technologies were changing the way young people learn and play and socialize and engage civically and what that could mean for education. And the very first grant that we made was to a researcher. I think at the time she was at USC and now she's at UC Irvine. Her name is Mizuko Ito. Everybody calls her Mimi Ito. And we made her a grant for the first sort of large-scale ethnographic study of what young kids were doing online. And she had 2 major insights that became fundamental to our grant making. The first was that kids are hanging out online, similar to what we all did at the mall when we were young. They're doing online, but being social online, they're learning all kinds of things. They're not only learning how to use these new technologies, but they're being introduced to new ideas and interests through their hanging out online. And the other big insight was that kids were engaging deeply in things that they were interested in online through online communities, and that there was a lot of learning that happened when they did this. And so she published this work in a book called Hanging Out, Messing Around, and Geeking Out. And it's often called HAMAGO for short. If you are at all involved in the Hive Learning Network here in New York, you probably have heard the term HAMAGO before. And I highly recommend the book. It's very interesting. But basically it argues that we need to design learning experiences for youth that allow them to be social, that allow them to hang out, that allow them to tinker around and test out new ideas, mess around, and allow them to dive deep into the things that they're most interested in, and that's the geeking out part. And over the intervening years since then, we have continued to invest deeply in research to better understand how young people learn today, especially with digital media. And we've also funded a number of design experiments to test hypotheses, to pilot new tools, and to really deeply explore what learning environments and learning experiences of the digital age could and should look like. And I'm not keeping up to my slides here. So, and from all of this research has emerged an approach to learning that we're calling connected learning. And it is in large part based on Mimi's research, and of course refined over the years through the other research and the design experiments that we've carried out. But we think that it's the best approach for preparing young people for today's world. And it basically says that there are 3 spheres of a young person's life that matter most to them, and that we need to design learning with these pieces in mind, that the most powerful learning happens when all of these are brought together. And the first is social or peer networks. So I think we can all agree that learning is fundamentally a social endeavor. As I mentioned, we learned all kinds of new things from our friends and from our personal relationships and are introduced to new interests. The second important sphere is interests. And these are the things that young people are really passionate about and want to get better at. I'm sure we've all had the personal experience that learning is really powerful when it's connected to something that you're interested in. And then the third sphere is, on the slide, it's called academic, but really what it is payoff in the real world. That somehow these social peer networks and interests need to level up for a young person to have payoff for them, whether that's through academic achievement or getting a job or an internship or somehow being able to productively contribute to their community. And so at the center of these three important spheres is connected learning. You know, the problem is that this is very hard to do. These three worlds of a young person's life are often highly fragmented. And it's oftentimes only the young person or a very, very motivated parent who have any idea what makes up these three spheres and has any kind of power to bring it together. But this is where badges come in, and we think badges can change this. So we have been funding badges because we believe, as Carla was saying, they can help to connect in and out of school learning in really powerful ways, and that they can help bring visibility to 21st century skills and competencies that aren't captured well through traditional means like grades or transcripts or whatnot. And we really think that badges can be the Trojan horse to transform learning. And so how did we get here? So this is the second part of the story. So a big part of our grant making in digital media and learning has been to create a field called digital media and learning. And what that has evolved to over the years is a community of folks who really identify around the concepts related to connected learning. And our grantees really all know each other, and all of the work is very interconnected. And I should mention that in the Digital Media and Learning Program, we very much feel that our grantees are co-creating our work with us. They're definitely at the table with us because, you know, we're in this innovation space where there's no way that we can have the answer to a lot of the questions that we're asking. So we depend very heavily on our grantees. And as Carla was saying, when a few years ago, a group of our grantees went to MozFest, Mozilla Festival, and came back and said, hey, we have this great idea for digital badging, we listened to them and we thought that sounds really interesting. And it's around the time that we began to fund Mozilla to build the technical infrastructure to make badging possible, the open badge infrastructure that Carla was describing. And we also held a competition on digital badges. And about every other year in the Digital Media and Learning Program, we hold a competition as a way to infuse our grant making with new ideas. And it's always on a topic that we don't know much about, but we want to know more about, and we want to build community around that topic. So it was in about 2010, 2011 that we held this competition, and it ultimately funded 30 different groups, including Cooper Hewitt, to build badge systems. And you know, competition was really fierce. There were hundreds of applications, and we were actually pretty surprised by the number of applications we received. And it really indicated to us that there were a number of people out there that were thinking about this and agreed that there was great potential in badging. So that was really exciting for us. And other groups that that won the competition included like Disney and 4-H and Girl Scouts and Intel. So it was a really incredible group of organizations that won this competition. And at the end of the year, after they completed their work, we had 30 different models of what badges could look like. So we were both helping to build the technical infrastructure to make it possible, and we had 30 different models for people to see what these things look like in the wild. And we also were funding a number of people to document the learning that was happening in the competition. And so by the end of the competition, we had a lot of great insight into what the potential of badging was. But we still had a long way to go. And we knew its potential, and we wanted to continue the momentum. So, oops, sorry, falling behind on my slides. So in 2012, MacArthur, you can see Connie Yall there. She's the director of the Education Grant Making Program at MacArthur. She's my boss. Mark Sermon, who's the executive director of Mozilla, and David Theo Goldberg, who is with an organization called Haystack that runs our competition, and President Clinton. As Carla had mentioned earlier, we decided to make this commitment at the Clinton Global Initiative America meeting as a way to find new partners. And at the time we thought, oh my God, this is audacious. We're going to, talk about 1 million students and 1 million workers are going to benefit from badges over 2 or 3 years. And, we really thought that that was incredibly aspirational, and we're a little bit nervous about it. And we've already surpassed that goal, so it's pretty exciting. But even, President Clinton, you can see, got up on stage with the 3 of them and really praised badges. He largely saw badges as a way to connect veterans to employment and a way to connect disadvantaged youth to jobs. And so, although I think he very much saw the potential for badges for learning, I think he was really excited about them as a tool for workforce development. Another really big thing happened in 2012, and Tawa's going to talk much more about this, but I'm going to give you sort of a brief overview. So the mayor of Chicago approached MacArthur in early 2012 and said, hey, can you help us badge summer learning activities? We hear you're doing badging, and we think they might help motivate young people to want to learn over the summer. And we weren't really prepared for it, but we decided to do it. I'm going to let Tawa tell that story. But it was very successful. It was a huge pilot, and it was very successful and exhausting, but exciting. Tawa was also part of that work, so we can all attest to it. But it was the first real pilot of badges at scale, and we got some data out of it that was really helpful for us. I'm sure Tawa's going to tell you about this, to have conversations with Chicago Public Schools and with employers in Chicago to help build out the badge ecosystem. And also, as a result of last summer, there were a number of other mayors and other cities that were watching this work closely, and they approached the mayor in Chicago afterwards and said, hey, can you help us figure out how to do this in our city? We think it could really help to reduce summer learning loss and build a workforce pipeline and do all these different kinds of things. And so this year, there are actually 6 cities that are going to be piloting badges. They include, Chicago is continuing its work, Los Angeles, Dallas, Columbus, Pittsburgh, and Washington, D.C., which is really exciting. And there are a number of other cities that are sort of waiting in the wings, and actually New York is one of them. New York has been at the table from the very beginning of the conversation around badges, in large part because of the High Learning Network here in Chicago, in New York. Chicago. The High Learning Network has been experimenting with badges for a number of years now, and also as a result of SummerQuest. So I see Ali Tan over there, and I know that the Department of Education was really interested in exploring the potential of badges as a way to capture and document the learning that happens in New York over the summer. So we're really encouraged by that, and we hope that you continue to do that work. I know that some of it was sort of put a little bit on the back burner because of your mayoral transition, but we really would very much like to support you in continuing that work here in New York.
Yes, that's terrific. It's great to hear, and I think we're going to hear from, we have Debbie Marcus here from the Digital Ready Project, and we can hear a little bit later about what's going on with DOE.
Okay,
So
great.
Yeah, well, so just kind of in closing, I think we at MacArthur think that badges can be the infrastructure that can transform learning in the city, that it can be help to ensure summer and after school learning is captured and that it counts, and that badges can help highlight a pathway to careers and jobs and help build the workforce pipeline. And MacArthur has been very much at the center of this, but we really want to expand it and invite others to come in and help us support this work. And so I hope that in part the conversation this afternoon can be about that. So thank you.
great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And we're going to go back to Carla for a moment and hear more about the work of the Badge Alliance specifically, briefly, and then we'll hear from Tawa and Halima as well. So Carla?
So let me go back a little bit. So the Badge Alliance, as I mentioned a little earlier, the Badge Alliance is really the outgrowth of the work that's been happening at Mozilla. And part of the reason that we moved to the Badge Alliance is because we realized that Mozilla is primarily focused on software, and they produced kind of the basic infrastructure piece that was necessary in order to make open badges come alive. But realizing that now that we're having this huge uptake and interest in badges, that we want to support the ecosystem, and recognizing that supporting the ecosystem isn't just about building software, it's about having conversations with people, and it's about making sure that different constituencies get acknowledged and recognized. So a little bit about how the Badge Alliance, what the Badge Alliance is. It's a network of organizations, and we're aiming to build and enhance the Open Badges ecosystem. And by ecosystem, again, this is one of those words everybody you're hearing tossed around a lot lately. About ecosystem, what we mean by that is there are different aspects to Open Badges. So while there's software, there's also people who are interested in issuing. There are people who are interested in consuming, what we call consuming badges, which means like you've earned that badge, now I want to be able to look at it and understand why it's meaningful. And then there are also people who are interested in understanding what the validity of a badge is. So maybe that there are certain levels to an ecosystem which involve not just the earner, but also organizations who might do things like accrediting. And I will put a pin in that one and we'll come back to that. What the Badge Alliance is, it's framed on the constellation model for social change. So what that means is we work with topic-based, or actually subject-specific, topic-oriented groups. And we call them working groups. And right now we have about, and I believe later on in this presentation, we have the listing of the working groups. And I think we have, or anyway, so we have a listing of the working groups. And we have about 10 right now. And what we've done is actually divide them into different areas. One is looking at infrastructure. So what is the essential aspect of that constitutes what gets where it's a little complex. The essential parts to our ecosystem that we need to support from an infrastructure standpoint, but not just technical, conceptual infrastructure. So the Badge Alliance is actually much more of we're not necessarily a software organization at all. We're more of a conceptual holding pen for all of the thought about open badges at this point. And then also, what does the ecosystem itself look like? So recognizing that there's activity happening in workforce, that's part of the ecosystem. Recognizing that there's activity happening in higher ed, that's part of the ecosystem. Recognizing that there's activity happening as educator badges for professional development, that's part of the ecosystem. So encouraging all those different constituencies to start using badges, understanding why they're meaningful. So we're working as groups to essentially collaboratively define what's meaningful to each one of us, each one of those working groups, and then say, what can we deliver in cycles? So we have essentially 6-month cycles that we work within. So what can we deliver in those first 6 months? And I can go into a little bit more of that in detail, but here are actually, this is the listing of the working groups. All I have to say, K-12 is inaccurate. We don't have a working group right now for K-12. So there's the Open Badges standard itself. That's part of the infrastructure group. There's endorsement that is also part of the infrastructure of the Open Badges ecosystem. A little bit about endorsement. Endorsement is the thing that's going to, when people ask quite a bit, they ask about, well, how can we guarantee that this badge is meaningful or has validity? Endorsement is the thing that's really going to get us there. And what it is allowing a third party or an issuing organization to look at other people's badges and say, wow, yeah, that's fantastic. We agree with all the criteria that's listed in your badges. We're actually going to sign our name to your badge system or our name to your set of badge class, what we call badge class. So that's all the badges that would be a certain type. And what that does, it starts to change the value structure so that smaller organizations, because there are lots of small organizations who are issuing badges, can start to compete on a much bigger playing field. So if, let's say, for example, I don't know if this would ever happen, but let's say MacArthur decides that they want to endorse some foundation. Some organization starts to issue foundation badges. And MacArthur looks at it and say, that's fantastic. We love that. We're going to actually sign our name to your badges as well. But maybe this is a tiny little organization who's just kind of up and coming. All of a sudden, with the imprimatur of MacArthur, that badge system plays a totally different role. So the idea of endorsement starts to knit together the ecosystem and starts to provide the ability to create these what we call trust networks. So as I mentioned at the beginning of when I talked before, the idea, there's a whole lot of tacit assumptions built into what we understand about degrees and certificates right now. Badges start to surface all of those things, and then they start to allow, through the concept of endorsement, we'll start to be able to kind of take those apart and then put them back together in different ways. So we don't necessarily need to rely on traditional understandings of, let's say, what a degree might be meaningful or worth. And it'll also allow things like, let's say, community colleges to start operating in totally different ways than they might otherwise in comparison to four-year degree granting universities. So just a little bit about endorsement. That's part of the infrastructure. And then in addition, research. So I'm jumping down a little bit. I'll jump a little bit on this slide. research is really a vital aspect to a functioning ecosystem, an open badges ecosystem that can support itself. And that's really the goal of the Badge Alliance, is to create a self-supporting ecosystem so that we all kind of carry different weights and roles within that ecosystem. So there's no real one center point to that badge system anymore. So it's not necessarily Mozilla who's driving everything. Now it's everybody has a foot in the game, or whatever that phrase is. Skin in the game. Thank you. A dog in the fight, skin in the game, right? Foot in the door. All of those things. So all of those things can take place. So we want to make sure that we actually are starting to do research, and real research, not necessarily just case studies. So understanding that case studies are fantastic, but if there's real academic research that we can point to, that's going to allay a lot of concerns about open badges in general. And then you can see that there's also cities, and then policy. I'll just talk briefly about that. Recognizing that, as I mentioned a little earlier, badges carry a whole lot of sensitive data with them. And recognizing that there are all kind of issues surrounding learning at certain ages, from the age 13 below and 18 and below, and there's whole lots of questions about data privacy in general. We want to get out in front of that and understand what the policy implications are for things like open badges. So our goal really is to foster an ecosystem where learning is connected across contexts, subjects, and lifetimes. And that sounds really a little bit blue sky, but at the same time, that's really our goal, is to make sure that these things can happen, because we've seen, as Jen has already noted, there's so many things happening in so many different environments that badges can start to either be a response to, or start to help move along the way. They are not the response to everything. They are not going to solve all of our problems, but they can get us further down the road to a lot of things. So we will be launching in June, by the way. So the Badge Alliance is not actually launched yet. So we will be launching at CGI America. Right now we're about 95% sure we're launching at CGI America at the end of June, where we will make a new commitment to the number of badges. And so at that time, we will actually have a much larger web presence. Right now we have a vanity site where you can essentially sign up for working groups. But please go ahead and go to our current website. It's badgealliance.org, where you can sign up for working groups and become a voice in those different working groups to cause change where you'd like to see it happen.
Thanks so much, Carla. The launch is very exciting. And now we're going to hear from Tawa Mitchell, who, as I said, until very recently was with the mayor's office in Chicago. I didn't mean to leave that cliffhanger in the air, but she is now going to join the MacArthur Foundation. But she helped spearhead the Summer of Learning in Chicago, and badges were an integral part of that, and we're going to hear more about that now. Tawa.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Tawa Kalitu Mitchell, and Tawa is what everyone calls me so that you can pronounce my name. It means the gift of God, and it's Nigerian, but Tawa is my name. So I am happy to sort of bring the conversation down to the level of, like, you'll never hear mayor's offices being considered as being on the ground. But for the purposes of this conversation, we will say that I have the privilege of talking to you about why we got involved and, why Mayor Emanuel would care about badges anyway. The mayor coming into office as the mayor of our city was obviously had a lot of things on his mind with regard to education and big, hairy, audacious goals around things that he wanted to accomplish. And one of those things was around extending the school day and extending our school time. Chicago has historically had one of the shortest school days ever in the country, and so he spent, in the history of time. I can't be too dramatic about it. It's really insane. And so when one of the first major accomplishments of this administration was to really extend the school day and really get involved in extended learning time. So we, as a district in Chicago Public Schools, had an Office of After School Programs, and we had seen some progress in being able to extend our out-of-school time offerings, but now we had longer instructional time in the day to really focus on some of the things that we know matters for kids. And then we also had this small teacher strike. Some people may have heard of this. which presented, challenges for our city in many ways. But if you think about the bright side of it, we had an amazing network of out-of-school time providers and youth development providers and cultural institutions who really came together during this time to ramp up their programming for youth in our city and work and partner in different ways. Not just, we had some contingency sites in our portfolio that were open during the strike where these organizations help to provide services for youth and families. But throughout our city, we saw this amazing coming together, I think, around what most would perceive as a crisis at that time. And we didn't want to sort of miss an opportunity in that crisis. And then, and so we had this sort of momentum amongst our partners. And then lastly, and this is not news to anyone, that we wanted to address the summer learning loss. And we know how much learning is lost over the summer for youth. And that typically 1 to 3 months of education and learning time is lost during that time. So how could we not have the summer slide happen? So we wanted to build on this longer school day. We wanted to sort of try to combat this summer slide, and then we wanted to sort of build on this momentum, this positive momentum around what was happening with our organizations, institutions, et cetera. So as Jen referenced, we called MacArthur because we thought about digital badges and open badges as an opportunity for all of us to rally together around one thing. We have a rich array, as does New York, of organizations that could jump on board and could issue badges and could really get behind this idea, and many of whom, thanks to the advent of the Hive Chicago, were already partners in that space. Some of whom, we had a smaller group of organizations, nonprofits, cultural institutions, etc., who could be leaders and help bring others along. So what we did was we partnered not only our, and I'll just skip to some of the numbers, but we had all of our city agencies involved, so our public schools, our parks, our Department of Family and Support Services, who already have our libraries, who already have a rich array of activities happening during the summer. But then we had all of these other partners coming together with us to expand the number of summer learning opportunities that we had available in our city. So that big number, that 200,000 summer learning opportunities, those were all the unique places and offerings that all of these organizations and institutions combined offered our young people. And then each one of them, each one of the participating organizations, we had over 150 or so who participated. Those organizations each signed on to issue a badge. So in partnership with the Mozilla Foundation, really Carla and Jen are like my cousins at this point because we had so much time together. For many different things, as you might imagine, we had to put together a consent form that we wanted to use for parents, for all of the youth under 13 who were participating. So we had a lot of conversations around FERPA and things that were involved in how we would get our young earners to participate. The Chicago Children's Museum was a big help in that, the public schools obviously, but we spent a lot of time together trying to just figure out the legal consent and the legal opportunities to sign folks up for the badges. We had to build the website, the infrastructure for how people would earn a backpack in Chicago public schools. We had to make the case for doing this in the first place because we had meetings like this with our top providers of youth services in our city and out of school time so that we could even introduce this concept much like we're doing today, so that they could answer questions about why if I'm the Peggy Noda Art Nature Museum, why should I even be doing this? Or if I'm the Art Institute, and well, they were already involved, the Art Institute, the Museum of Science and Industry, other people were already in the Hive, as I mentioned, but then we had a lot of other smaller organizations. I am a basketball camp again on the south side of Chicago, and my goal is to like combat violence in the summer. Why would I want to issue a badge? And if I do, how would I want to do that? But first we started with our 800-pound gorillas, our Ys, our Boys and Girls Clubs, our museums, to say this is what we're trying to do. And once we had their buy-in, we were able to then hold the big meetings at the Cultural Center and our large Washington Library downtown to say, and we want anybody who is interested in this concept to get on board, and you don't have to do it alone. So we have Hive member institutions, thanks to the support of MacArthur. We had Mozilla literally providing the tech support in the back office for I'm the Ma and Pop organization. I don't even have a computer during the summer camp. So this is how I would issue a paper badge, and this is what that means. This is how I can dissect my basketball camp, the things that I'm trying to accomplish, teamwork. I can badge that. I can badge drilling. Dribbling, all these kinds of things, and these are the kinds of learning objectives that we have in our program, and these are the ways that we can badge each component of that. And one of the main goals that I forgot to mention, we are the mayor's office in the city of Chicago. We want people to see Chicago as a learning laboratory, as learning is happening all around us. It's been said often during this conversation today, but Chicago as a platform of learning. How can we really get folks engaged in all the different types of things that we're trying to do as a city? So we had these very detailed, I think, meetings about, one, informing people what a badge is, two, what is the relevance of it, three, who's going to care, who are our partners who will get on board and use and say, put their sort of stake in the ground and say, we will give this badge currency. So one of the big ones there was DePaul University said that they would start to look at badges, at least in Chicago, as a part of their admission standards. So we were having these conversations all over our city, not just to recruit the issuers of the badge and get folks to badge the programming opportunities that they offered, but then also to at the same time get employers involved, get our higher ed institutions involved, which is an ongoing process for us. So as you could see, we had some success with that last summer, it being our first time out of the gate. I will also say that you didn't have to be attached to a youth serving program to earn a badge. We partner with the University of Chicago, the Digital Youth Network, and others to create online and self-paced activities so that they can begin to earn badges on their own from the comfort of their homes. We had some really interesting challenges. It was the one that the University of Chicago developed was youth were trying to help this girl solve real world problems. Her brother had gotten himself in trouble with the law, and in trying to help him, sort of get out of that circumstance, young people had to engage in a series of challenges around civic engagement, around positive ways to interact with our city and our actual departments and, I guess, infrastructure of our city, you could say. And so young people really got engaged in that. And then at the end of the summer, we had a huge summer fair where all of the young people who had earned badges, mostly in the programs, but also in the online community, came together to display their work. And it was phenomenal. It exceeded our expectations because that was something else that we did on the fly. Like, all this great stuff is happening. You know what? We should have this fair. And all of you, I'm sure, have been part of putting something like that on. But at the end of the day, it was really a remarkable thing to see. So I, too, will show a quick video to talk about where we hope to go this summer. We have taken this concept of Summer of Learning now to the Cities of Learning that Jen referenced, and we're really trying to make this a year-long endeavor where young people are engaged year-round. We had activities during the winter break, because we're finally on one calendar, finally all on the same calendar, no more tracks in our system. So everyone had the same spring break, everyone had the same winter break, and so we were able to use those opportunities to really highlight this work. So I'm going to show the video. You'll probably get sick of seeing some of these images, but I think it will underscore at least what we're trying to do in Chicago, specifically around City of Learning. And then I'll come back and tell you about some interesting things that we're trying to accomplish this summer. There we are.
Chicago City of Learning is a citywide movement that invites young people of all ages to participate in one of the largest interactive learning projects in the country.
Over 100 Chicago organizations, hands-on experience, online platforms.
Chicago City of Learning brings all together the power of learning is on. In Chicago City of Learning, when we learn, we earn. Badges.
It's a new idea to recognize all the learning you wear inside.
There are earning badges that bring activities on your own or by participating in a program. Complete challenges and your work will be featured at special events for all of Chicago to see.
The best part about badges, you get to share a badge with friends, teachers, and even employers. You don't know it yet, but this is big.
Chicago City Learning changed the way people think about what learning really means.
Learning what we want to learn the way we want to learn.
Learning anywhere, everywhere. In the entire city of Chicago.
Where learning is social, learning with friends, and making new friends. So choose your own adventure.
Explore Chicago.
Earn badges.
Discover your future.
So the one thing I'll say about these videos, that you've seen a lot of the same kids over and over again because they were in Chicago, but those were not staged activities. Nat, the filmmaker, went around to the various providers that we had who were issuing badges, and had the opportunity to observe the forensics thing, the 3D printing, and those kinds of activities were happening all over the city. And so just so there's no preconceived notion of where these badges were earned or that they were earned in specific communities, this is a heat map that shows you where the programs are taking place and where kids were earning badges. And it really was all over Chicago because there was something for everyone, and we're very proud of that. And so really quickly, just some new things that are on deck for this summer. Last year we had a drop-in center at DePaul, what we called a youth hub, and it was DePaul's Loop campus, I should say, which is in downtown Chicago. So we had a lot of interest in that. This year we have 5. So we have one of those drop-in centers in all 5 regions of our city, which is really exciting. Last year, again, last year, and I don't know how I forgot to say this, our frame for earning badges was in STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And on our website, if you were trying to earn a badge, you earned it in one of those categories, or you searched for opportunities that were categorized that way. So this year on our website, for the Chicago City of Learning website, it'll be more interest driven because kids don't think that way, right? So they'll get to say, I like whatever, drumming, and then be able to find a program that's issuing badges in music or something like that. We are taking this Exploring Chicago to another level. So we will also have, last year you could earn individual badges and then level up to the Mayor's City badge and earn really neat opportunities that you unlocked at this end of the year fair. This year we will continue to do that, but you will also be able to earn a badge by going to our summer festivals and really connecting that to learning, very specific learning outcomes that that kids will be able to connect with when they go to various activities that the city provides all summer that our Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events offers. And then I will say, I'll just lift up one more thing because I know we're short on time. The Youth Council, we did not have, while we had authentic youth voice in many of the programs represented that issued the badges, we have a 14-member youth council that's really just focused on summer of learning this year. So what worked, what didn't work, what are some things that we could do to enhance it, that we really sort of built on those ideas and suggestions for this year, and I think that's important. And I would not be channeling my inner Connie Yowell, my new boss, class. If I didn't mention, one of the things we're most excited about, and LA is doing this too, is the data sharing agreement that we think we now have perfected between this Summer of Learning and Cities of Learning project and our initiative with the Chicago Public Schools. So now we're working towards a state where teachers will actually be able to look at these badges and know what they mean and know that their students are not just knuckleheads or they're not just hanging out, but that wow, you know, Johnny earned 12 science badges. Who knew that Johnny was engaged in this way? And that's really the future of where we're trying to go. This the Holy Grail, the connection to the Common Core, et cetera. But I think, you know, we're drinking the Kool-Aid, but we believe that this is really an opportunity for all the things that Jen and Carla have highlighted to you, not just in this world of out-of-school time, but this connection to higher ed and workforce development and learning pathways, et cetera. And I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much, Carla. And now we're going to bring it home to New York with Halima. And I think, Halima, can you just talk a little bit about what the Hive is in New York, which is similar to Chicago? I don't know that we've covered that. Does everyone know what the Hive is? If you don't, raise your hand.
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
Okay. I saw one hand. Say it anyway. Just talk a little bit briefly about what the Hive is in New York and then.
So, my experience with the Hive, I guess, is not all-encompassing, but it's a network of organizations, cultural and educational organizations across New York City, and it's creating a network where we can come together to share resources, to share ideas, and to further our common goals. And I think that the Digital Badging project that we've been working on with many Hive members is a good example of that. And I know that we have someone else who's going to be expounding on that a little bit more, but there's been so many people coming together from multiple organizations over the last, is it a whole calendar year, Leah? Almost a calendar year, to work on this idea of creating federated badges, so badges that can be used across all of the Hive networks. And that's been an ongoing process that we have some from Brooklyn College, from I-Beam, from, help me out, some of the organizations, Global Kids, obviously. And so all of these members have been coming together to discuss what's important to our students in our learning environments, but also what are common denominators across what we're doing with badges and with learning in general. So that's not an all-encompassing definition of the Hive.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's a great way to start us. So as was mentioned, my name is Halima Johnson, and I work as the Digital Education Coordinator at the Smithsonian's Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit about how we began working with digital badges, how these badges integrate with our youth programs, some of the discoveries that we've made along the way, and where we see badges going in the future. So I thought I would start with this slide because it's a great way of framing our story and our approach to digital badges. We work with, our teen programs have almost 86% minority students who participate, and we are looking at digital badges as a way of enhancing college applications and having badges that work for the students to develop strong portfolios and really demonstrate or enhance the skill development that's happening in the workshops that we do, to make up for some of the deficits that we see in their high schools and in the public education system. This is me in high school. So design prep has been around for over 15 years. And as a high schooler, I participated all 4 years of high school. I was in the Van Leer Fellows program. I was a team docent. I loved it. And the program really meant a lot to me, and is one of the major reasons why I ended up studying design at the Rhode Island School of Design and then working for some time as a designer. When I had an opportunity to come back to the museum and work in the education department, it was very exciting for me to sort of go full circle and to provide a similar opportunity for other students. So my role in the museum is to help to coordinate the integration of badges into the youth programs that our students are doing. And those, I'll talk a little bit about the structure of those in a moment. But we began working with digital badges as one of the DML grantees, as was mentioned. And this idea of badges, I think, fit really well with what we do at the museum in general. Those of you who know the Director of Education, Carolyn Pathan, and the whole team, the education team at the museum, we're really interested in the intersection of innovation and technology and actually utilizing the design process in what we do. So we're not just teaching students about design, but we use it in our own work to find new ways of engaging students and educating them. So this idea of really bringing the students into the process and thinking of them as the user and how can we make badges work for them is a large part of what we did. So our program involved studio workshops that professional designers come in and they actually run workshops based on the design work that they do in their professional careers. We do art and design college visit. So we take our students to the highest level art and design schools in the country and show them what it looks like to study design at a college level. We also do studio visit. And so our students go into professional design firms and see what designers' work looks like, what that environment looks like. There are internships that we provide for a small cohort of our students. So for 6 weeks, they're doing a summer paid internship at a design firm and working side by side with designers. Our largest event is the Teen Design Fair, and these happen once a year in DC and in New York. And these events draw about 300 students to come and meet with professional designers and interview them, talk to them about what their work day looks like, how they got into the field that they're in, what they like and don't like about it. And this is a great opportunity for them just to get to know what this mysterious design field is like. This is the event where we first launched our badge initiative back in 2012. And this shows a little bit of what we were thinking when we launched. We created this matrix to talk about or to demonstrate the different design skills that students developed in our workshops. And we created sort of a game-like infrastructure. So the idea would be you would start at the bottom and then be able to level up and either go, in a straight shot vertically or meandering path through the different disciplines. When we launched, it was not widely adopted by the students. I think there was some students didn't know what badges were at that point, and they didn't know why they should be earning them. So while we put a lot of thought into creating this great leveling system, they were like, I don't know why I would want this. They didn't know what badges were. So I think that was a big learning for us, and we realized that we needed to push further. We integrated badges in a pilot with our high fashion grant. And so this was a 24-session deep dive with 12 students who were accepted by application. And they worked side by side with designers and learned pretty much everything there is to know about the fashion industry. And they developed their own brands, their own fashion brands. So simultaneously, we were badging these students in their skill development, their participation, the concepts that they were developing, as well as online activities that we created. So pretty much anything you could badge, we badged. And we had 100% participation. The students really, some adopted it very quickly and others were still very hesitant. But in working with them, we learned a lot about how badges could function and what students could get out of badges. One of the things that I observed was actually at the end of this workshop, we asked them to update their resume. And when I read their resumes, and I think Caroline can attest to this, what they wrote about their high fashion experience was like fashion workshop. And then they would put it under like other or random experience, and they didn't really express the skills that they had developed. They did Illustrator, they learned Adobe Photoshop, they learned how to cut a pattern, they learned about marketing, about supply and demand, they learned about branding and the product life cycle of fashion. They learned so much, and what came across in their estimation of the workshop was so limited. And so I think that had a huge impact on how we started to look at badges moving forward. So not only did we issue badges, but we also asked students about their experience. So we did focus groups, and we had a lot of informal discussions with them. One of the things that we took away was that the students actually wanted badges to be harder. They wanted badges to mean something. I really appreciate value was brought up. They were looking at badges as something that could mean something to them and also to other adults. They wanted badges that could demonstrate their skills, that could be a letter of recommendation, that would show adults, the powers that be is the way they kind of think of it, what they've done and what they're learning. And so we really thought about moving forward, how do we make badges work for these students? They mentioned to us that they wanted these badges to get them into college and to get them jobs. And while this is exactly what we were thinking, how that happened was still being something we needed to figure out. So we started to think of badges as a way of making the learning visible to not just the student, but also to outside organizations, schools, etc. So we adjusted our approach a little, and we started to develop badges that included specific criteria. So this is an example of a badge that we issued to students for their participation in a workshop. Unfortunately, the text is a little bit small, but this is a workshop that we did on graphic design, and it was in conjunction with the DOE's cover design competition. So the students were learning, had submitted cover designs, and they were now refining them in order to submit them for the final panel. So these were the finalists, and they worked with a graphic designer, John Emerson, on typography design specifically. So they learned on the bottom these criteria about developing visual hierarchy and also about creating emphasis and improving text readability. So we pulled out these specific skills that the students were developing and wanted to highlight them and make them visible, not just to the student, but also to whoever would be viewing this badge later on. And this is the direction that we began to go in, is pulling out specific skill sets and looking at those. Because we realized that these badges needed to travel beyond our interaction with the students, we felt initially that maybe they would want to share them on Facebook or share them with their friends, and they came back to us and told us they were not interested in that. So they, one of the students was like, yes, okay, I get what a digital badge is, but like, what does it do? And that sort of hung in the air with me for a while. They wanted to know, okay, well, who's going to be looking at this? And at that point, we didn't really have an answer to that question. We thought, well, you can show it on a job interview. But for a student to give the definition about badges that Carla was able to give, that's kind of a big lift. So we realized that we needed to do that. We needed to form the network, form the ecosystem in which these badges would mean something outside of the students, that we could go before them and build the bridges for them. So we started to look at identifying these life skills that would travel beyond school, that were not skills that were even gradable, skills that students were practicing when they were with us, skills around communication, around presentation, around college and career readiness, that we are already doing in our workshops, but just needed to become visible. One of the ways that we started to do this is a new pilot. With the support of Deutsche Bank, we're piloting digital badges as a way to support digital portfolios. And so this slide shows how Design Prep, we're developing great work, And this work often goes into a portfolio of work samples. And this is what schools look at as a way to evaluate students. And now ACAD is the Association of Independent Colleges of Art and Design. This is where we want our students to go next. This is where we're looking at their future. And so looking at badges is a way of supplementing this so that you're not just seeing the work samples, but badges are able to demonstrate the learning content that was involved in all of their programs, the type of interest that they have based on which programs they attended, their experience level, as well as competencies and concepts that they've been exposed to and have developed or practiced, as well as validation of their learning. So we have had some discussions with ACAD already about doing this, and we will continue to work with them. But we're developing an ACAD badge, basically. It's a digital portfolio badge that we're working with them to determine the criteria that they would like to see, and then almost looking backwards to show that through the workshops that we're doing and the development that we're doing with our students. So we see badges as a way of really creating a currency of information that gets shared with the places that the students want it to go. So they're looking to be applicants at these schools, and we'd like them to go there and make badges the way for them to really get there. This is just a graphic layout of the way that we're considering badges might work. So you can actually see their work alongside the badges that they've earned. And then when you click on those badges, you obviously get the metadata behind the badges, as well as the visuals of the work that they've done. So that's a brief summary of a lot of stuff.
Well, I'm sure.
Yeah, please do.
Different groups want badges for different reasons. So our big mistake at the beginning was that we assumed everybody would want to earn lots and lots of badges. And in fact, for many audiences, that is the case. As part of the Smithsonian, we got data from other Smithsonian badge projects. And we learned, for example, little kids like lots and lots of different badges and want to share them, and they don't want to necessarily work so hard on it. Adults love to earn, particularly in relationship to a cultural institution, they want to easily earn many things, but they want it to like equal free parking or a coffee in the cafe or some ice cream. And so they wanted to kind of add up to something immediate. But so while we were applying that philosophy to this group, and the teens were the one group, and it was like all you needed to do is show up at the teen fair and get a badge. And we had 300 kids, actually 600 if you count 2 teen fairs, and something like 11 badges. But when we moved it to the Hive project, which was so great to pilot simultaneously, we had 12 kids, and they together created over 200 badges for themselves. So like once it was attached to that. So I think the other important takeaway is different audiences want badges for different reasons. And we wouldn't have figured that out unless we screwed up badly with one group and the other group done really well.
It's a learning experience.
Well, that was incredible. Really, really lots of information, lots of food for thought. So let's get to the questions. Either.
Providing that example. Can you speak a little bit about the learning curve for the organizations that were involved in badging, particularly around differentiating between participation and activities and developing competencies, and is that still an ongoing struggle, and how are you addressing that?
So yes, to the last question, it is an ongoing struggle. But what's very helpful, so, and you guys jump in here too, but 2 things. One is that we had, initially we had these information sessions. So they were day-long events. So they weren't, like the beginning we talked about what is a badge and why it matters and why we were trying to do this work. Then from there, we asked them to tell us what it is that they were going to be offering over the summer and what kinds of activities, what the learning objectives they thought those activities might yield. And then we had the employees from the Digital Youth Network were really like the technical assistance providers from that day. We had learning templates that we could use to help those organizations identify the program offerings that they would be implementing, and then also like within those what the learning objectives were. And then the individual DYN employees help them to identify what pieces of those would be badge. So initially everybody came up with like, oh, well, our program is 8 weeks or 12 weeks, and at the end of this 12 weeks you earn a badge. And so a lot of the work was saying, okay, but what's happening week 1? And then what is a learning objective for week 1? And then how can we badge that week 2, et cetera? And then what does that roll up into? And then also trying to help them think about, because we have the STEAM frame, what are you science, are you technology, engineering, et cetera? And that was very informative, because a lot of organizations transcended that STEAM framework in that they were really, when they dissected it, they were actually doing some science, some math, some art, and a lot of programs just hadn't even thought about their programs in that way. So that was all part of the process for us last year. And I think, again, having DYN support because they had, as being part of the Hive before, they had worked with a smaller subset of organizations, and then to do this, and so we had that expertise. And then again, those organizations talking to each other, I think those who had been offering badges, to have the Museum of Science and Industry work with like a Little Black Pearl, which is a small community-based organization, to think about their work in this way. So a lot of that was happening, but we had a series of these sessions, day-long sessions in different venues to try to build the momentum, the interest, and then also show those organizations what was possible. But the mayor's office didn't do that work independently. We partnered with the Digital Youth Network, who was a grantee of MacArthur, and Mozilla. No, I was about to say, and Mozilla. They were at every workshop. They also provided a lot of the technical assistance. Again, we did a lot of paper badging, and then how do you translate that into a digital badge? Jump in.
I just want to jump in. Actually, some of the things that we had done was actually give organizations spreadsheets, and that was a learning opportunity for us as well.
I blocked the whole spreadsheet.
Yeah, I was like, we had spreadsheets, hundreds and hundreds of spreadsheets, essentially asking people, giving them prompts. What are the things you're doing? What are you accomplishing? And then we actually gave them narrow categories. So we did give them the STEAM categories, and then there were types of badges. So we only really had 4 specific types last year. We had actually 3, participation, skill, and achievement badges. And we loosely defined those. And because we narrowed them, because we had kind of parameters for each one of those, that's where we actually went through and said, like, you said you were a science badge, but you're actually teaching music, and you're really covering engineering, and because you're doing audio engineering, and you're really also doing math because you're also thinking about syncopation and how that might fit into a time scale. And so we essentially reviewed all the stuff that came through.
Yeah, and I will say, yes. So we did these in-person things, and they had a bunch of paper, and they did these templates, and then they came back to their organizations to work with their team to do the Excel spreadsheet that Carla is talking about, and go through that exercise. There were also, like, her team answered phones, like, to talk to people, to talk them through, like, people, I mean, not to underscore the non-capacity, whatever the opposite of capacity is. So people would log in, and they would, I don't know how to find this, couldn't even open the spreadsheet. Yeah. So really basic hand-holding had to happen at scale. We had mayoral fellows who were like interested in education. I was like, great, this is your project for the summer. I mean, it was an all hands on deck effort to try to get the organizations to do it.
Sorry, yes. Next to Deb.
Yeah, well, this is great. I really appreciate this, and so thank you again very, very much. I'm looking at this page here and just sort of working off the issuer, the earner, the displayer. And some of the questions that I have at this stage are more about the reader. And, who reads these badges and how are they graphically displayed and how would I gain access to a badge? Let's just say I'm an employer or something like that. And I was looking also here at a statement, encourage your badge earner to share their badges on places that are meaningful to them, which of course makes sense, including blogs, social and professional networks, etc. So let's say I'm not in the learning circle, so to speak. I've never heard of a badge before, but all of a sudden I've been told that, hey, you should see this individual because they would be great for your project and they've got 4 badges. So I mean, it's just the graphic interface for, again, how accessing badges and reading badges. Some people, and then hearing that some people might have 2 or 3 badges, and then some might like to have 50 or 60 badges. So I'm just wondering how to navigate as somebody outside of using a badge through the reading process, or how to read these.
Carly, you want to take it?
Yep, I'll jump in there. So that's one of the primary questions about how badges get what we call consumed, right? So you called it read, and what a reader might look at when they're looking at that badge. Each badge, just to clarify, each badge actually contains all that data with it. So it's not just a graphic, it actually has metadata embedded within it. I did see where there, they can be links, which makes perfect sense. We're actually trying to move beyond links. So we're actually, the graphic itself contains all the information so that you don't have to rely on any kind of third party in order to look at things. But the idea about how does someone get familiarized with the world of badges, we have been talking pretty heavily right now about learners and being up in a certain academic environment. The goal with badges is actually there are many, many organizations, and Workforce is one of them, where you were just talking about, like, let's say you have somebody and you're, well, this is fantastic, I don't want these badge things. And what we're doing right now in the Workforce Working Group is asking exactly that question. Can we start working with, let's say, HR organizations so that they understand what a badge is? So when they see it, it starts to make sense. And this is some of the stuff that I think you were learning, Helena, about what happened, and understanding that again, that concept of the ecosystem, that unless we have some kind of demand for the badges, not only for people earning them, but also people consuming them, then the badge ecosystem doesn't exist as an ecosystem. It's really just a one-way direction of people broadcasting. So one of the primary things we're doing with the Workforce is trying to ensure that all of those handshakes are starting to happen, so that organizations can say, oh, I know what a badge is, because we're going to be coming up with messaging about badges so that everybody's actually using the same language when they talk about badges, and kind of things that seem relatively apparent but are a little difficult to actually implement when you're in an open source environment like this. But the idea of recognizing that, yeah, people are going to get these and they're going to have no idea what this is. And we're also in conversation with organizations like LinkedIn. And as soon as a badge cracks LinkedIn, we're kind of like home free. But we've had many, many conversations with the LinkedIn folks, and it's still an ongoing conversation. But there are people, you can share them currently on blogs, and obviously people who are acolytes, like the badge acolytes, and sharing them broadly and widely. But until there's some kind of currency behind them, until there's the I want something that you have, and you have what you have is embedded in a badge, that's something that we're working heavily towards.
And MacArthur is talking to Disney and Burberry and Starbucks and others, like, it's only going to take one to crack open, I think, and then they will.
Just DePaul University saying that we're going to be starting to look at this as part of our admissions cycle is pretty heavy duty. And so there are other things like that where we're trying to access. I was just at a meeting about 2 weeks ago where AT&T has an AT&T University, and they're looking at, well, we're really into these badge things, and that's entirely outside of the academic environment. I mean, it is a university in a kind of a larger sense, but it's also professional and environment. And as soon as things start to be accepted within an organization of that size, there are many, many people who are organizations who are on the brink of, yes, this is exactly what we've been looking for, or something along the lines that we've been looking for. So that's another huge area of interest. So definitely there's one of our former team members who's actually still at Mozilla has developed emergency preparedness badges. So having to do with the hurricane that came through here just a few years ago and recognizing that there was no way for people to communicate. So what she did was essentially create a whole series of badges. And what happened, because she was a member of the Open Badges team, is that organizations contacted her, like the American Red Cross, and said, hey, we are really interested in this kind of activity. Can we work together? So that is an ongoing activity for Jess Klein.
And there's an.
That's also the Rockaway Health.
That's it. Thank you. Yep.
Can I just ask a related question, which is what percentage, if you had any sense, I know you said it's hard to track, but of the badges you now have, what percentage are virtual and could be earned by anybody and have some sort of articulation where their competencies, they build on one another? So in other words, they meet all your dream criteria.
So ultimately, I can't give you an actual number. It would be really hard. It would be probably a relatively small number right now that you can, because a lot of organizations are context specific, and that's something that we actually was mentioned a little earlier about the Smithsonian badge or the Cooper Hewitt badges. Sorry, I always think of you guys as definitely separate. I know.
We are Cooper Hewitt.
Yeah.
We're both.
Both that one organization is recognizing that people want them for different reasons and they earn them for different reasons, and then they'll consume it. It would be a relatively small number, I would say, right now, that where people can earn things across different environments. The one thing that I really like to talk about when it comes to badges is recognizing that you have multiple audiences for your badges and that you can't just design for one audience. And if you do, then so I'll just mention that there are like 5 different audiences to think about when it comes to badges. There's the earner. What is the earner going to think of your badge? Do they want to earn your badge? There is the earner's environment. So there's that whole connected learning part of their social structure. What will they think of when this person earns a badge, right? There is the issuing organization. What was the intent? Where were they going when they started to think about developing these badges, right? Then there's the larger public. What will happen when they look at these badges? And then there's the other end, the consuming organization, right? Or the consumers, what will they think when they look at your badges? So you have lots of different audiences with very different desires. And what we've started to do too, even with some badges, is start to put in different descriptions, right? There's the description for the earner. What does the earner need to know about their badge? And then there's the consumer. Well, what are the key points that the consumer of this badge might really want? So a really well-designed badge system takes both ends of that spectrum into consideration.
You know, that's a great transition, if I could just for a moment, to talk about one other initiative in New York that Halima touched on. And we have Debbie Marcus here from the DOE, who's part of the Digital Ready team. And they have been in a badge designing process that has included the Cooper Hewitt. And I wonder if she could update us on their work and their thinking, just briefly.
Thank you for having me here. Let me get here.
Thank you. So Rob, my colleague, and I are here from the Office of Post-Secondary Readiness inside the Department of Education. And the department as a whole is looking at what are the ways that we can improve our college readiness and ultimately our college completion. And we have a variety of different programs that we're researching and learning about different ways we can get there. And we're in our digital learning team within that larger department. So that is our ultimate goal. And we've worked with badging in 2 ways. One is we ran a program called Connected Foundations, which was part of a BTOP grant, a Broadband Technology Opportunity Program, from 2011 to 13. And in that program, we taught digital literacy skills to students in mostly transfer high schools, which are high schools for students who have dropped out and are re-engaging or falling behind. And in that program, students also got a free laptop and discounted broadband at home. But the academic portion of the program was teaching digital literacy in a variety of content areas. And it was right around when the Mozilla badge competition was happening, and had been thinking about not just building digital literacy skills, but also what are the competencies our students need to have in order to succeed. So we use badging as a framework, long story short, a framework for all of the courses we created. We wound up creating 12 courses, working with almost 70 high schools. And we ultimately served over 5,000 students who took competency-based courses using badging. So it was very much the context was within just those courses and within those schools, so the badges didn't really travel, but it was a It was a way to create meaning and engagement for students who had not succeeded in more traditional forms of education. Fast forward to now, we are working on a program called Digital Ready, which we've mentioned a few times today, and partnering deeply with the Hive. And Digital Ready is taking some of the learnings from our Connected Foundations program, really looking at how do we put students at the center of learning, both in school and out of school. So our partnership with the Hive is helping us connect that in and out of school learning. And so we had 10 schools this year, 10 high schools, and next year growing to 20 schools, both middle and high schools, as part of this program. And those students are experiencing a wide array of student-centered learning opportunities, but the expanded learning opportunities, kids are taking classes and programs and having opportunities with 20 different organizations that are connected mostly with the Hive to really expand learning. And it's very similar to the opportunities we saw in Chicago, and really having students do everything from digital filmmaking to puppetry to carpentry and coding and all over the map, and really connect that learning out of school in school. And so we are exploring digital badging as a way to make that currency real, so that teachers can understand what kids are doing in their out of school time and really build a little ecosystem among our program. So that's what we're looking at right now. And a lot of the work we're doing across the organizations is to think about, there'll be some content-specific badges, so digital filmmaking or coding, but also the 21st century skills, the things that we need to be college and career ready. How can we have some commonalities across those organizations that is understood across the schools to have a collaboration badge? What does that actually mean?
Yeah.
In very, very different settings in and out of school, to have a creativity badge, things that we can really look at across. So a lot of our work is bringing the folks together to think about not just the badge itself, but how it might work, but what would it mean, and to really ascribe meaning in a fixed context.
Household income as a barrier to participate in online learning. We have rurality and the issue of actually broadband and reaching audiences. So that was one thing I thought of, because I think more of distance learning and lifelong learning. And two, I sort of started thinking about LEAD a little bit, L-E-E-D, and how y'all are so out in front of something, as LEAD was. And so, but ultimately, as people caught up and began to institutionalize and require those types of LEAD, the LEAD is becoming more, and this is a happy problem, irrelevant, because municipalities are requiring things that are a titanium LEAD standard or a silver or something. So those are just comments. So it's interesting to be so out far in front of something to think then ultimately is the best value that you actually don't become necessary. And then two, this issue of rurality, and glad to hear about paper badging as a way around that for rural populations having access to these kind of opportunities.
So I just want to mention briefly, access to badges is something that we take pretty seriously, and it's something that I know Chicago is taking really seriously, and all the cities this summer, the cities of learning, are very much concerned about specifically that. We want to have accessibility as a significant issue across pretty much all the cities who are interacting, and so the idea that access to the idea of something that they might only be able to get to at a library, which was something that we thought about significantly, and was one of the successes, I think, of Chicago Summer of Learning, was the idea that we knew that not everybody was going to have access, but we also knew, and that's part of it, there were those 80 different activities that could take place that were curated and created by DYN, Digital Youth Network. And also that game that Tawa described, it was just like so much fun, actually, that kind of took place, and recognizing that, sometimes I know in Chicago it was an issue that you wouldn't necessarily want to cross certain boundaries. So we also wanted to take that into consideration, that there were questions about location. That was specific. Geography was really a specific issue. And it is something that we do consider. From the Badge Alliance perspective, we don't have much control over that, so that's where the cities can really play a significant role in understanding that there are issues that need that need to be addressed.
Yeah, and I would add that when we have had conversations with leadership in other cities, we have said, we've told them that we really think that they need to have libraries at the table with them, because the libraries have the reach, they have the access to the internet. And earlier this spring, IMLS, the Institute for Museum and Library Services, held a public hearing about the need for broadband, the E-rate issue, the need for broadband in libraries and museums. And they, at that meeting, talked about the Cities of Learning work, the badge work, and that they very much see the libraries taking an important lead role in doing this badging work, and that for that reason, they feel that it's really important to ensure that all libraries everywhere in the country have access to broadband.
Megan gave me the mic, so I guess I get a chance to ask the next question. So I mean, this has been great to hear about the badging. It's a really exciting movement and promoting learning and so forth. But one question that kept popping into my head as a few of you were talking, when Tawa was talking about summer learning and badging that experience, when Halima was talking about the typography design project that you're working on, badging that experience, and particularly, Debbie, when you were talking about the digital ready opportunities you're creating for kids, why not, was there any debate about whether you should try to seek school credits for those experiences? Expand what schools give credits for versus badging, or in addition to badging? What are some of the pros and cons of badging versus credits? If you could spell that out for me, that would be great.
So I'll take a stab at it and then jump in with your experience. So the first thing is we know that students go to class and earn credits, and that system is going to be there at least for the foreseeable future. And this was about acknowledging the learning that happens outside of that context. So badges present an ideal way to do that, an innovative way to do that. So when you are hanging around with your friends, what are you learning, and how can that learning be relevant and then and encapsulate it in a way that others can understand. So that was the promise of badging for us, I think, from that context. But at the same time, our badging work is also within our Chicago Public Schools setting, is housed in the Office of Post-Secondary, what we now call the Office of College and Career Education. So the officer that is managing this work for CPS and how we think broadly about that, we're very similarly situated and thinking about it in very similar ways. So her team got it right away in terms of why it matters from this pathway perspective and from a college and career kind of perspective. So they have been the internal champions of this work for us. And also someone who sort of straddles the district and externally, really, a woman who founded MHA Labs and has been thinking a lot about how to give credit for things like team build, the 21st century sort of essential skills. So, and she's situated in that office as well. So we located internal champions who can help us talk about this with their district peers in a way. And then our third leg of the stool really was around this this data sharing agreement, so that we can ultimately get to this point of Chicago Public School teachers understanding and recognizing what the badge is and identifying their students in different ways than they do now, and giving them credit for that kind of learning. So we're trying to skin the cat, I guess you could say, multiple ways. You understand what I'm trying to say. As soon as it came out of my mouth, I was like, not that. But you understand what I'm saying. We're trying to. Yes, correct.
I think that another.
So, I mean, I think there's a couple different ways that we're thinking about it, and it's a really important question. One is just rooted in the student experience. So in some cases, those experiences that we're providing or that are happening elsewhere in the DOE are creditable. So internship experiences or other out-of-school learning can be creditable, but there's a lot of state regulation about what a credit actually is, and involves a certain number of hours and and alignment to standards. And so there are certain kinds of experiences that are creditable and certain kinds that aren't, and we don't want to not do the non-creditable kind just because it's not creditable. And then there's also schools that are looking at thinking about mastery-based instruction and mastery-based assessment, and so they are juggling the credit system alongside sort of have a parallel system running at the same time. Some of those are thinking about badges as a way to run their mastery-based system. So it's definitely something that folks are thinking of. And third, I think, as we learned in Connected Foundations, when we use badges inside a course, so the courses that we ran basically were re-engineered around competencies or badges, and every teacher had to juggle the dual problem of the badges and the competencies, and then at the end they still had to put in numeric or ABCD grade and try to figure out how those two things translated back and forth. Some people found that a valuable exercise, and some people did not.
Yeah, if I could add at the end, in a way, I think that badges is very interesting because they actually offer a way to circumvent this idea of credit and what the sort of institution has developed as a measure of learning, only because it's very rigid and rather limited to things that are easy to measure. So things in science and math, I think, are much easier to assess and measure. And I think that there's one program, BuzzMath, I think. They've done a really great job of actually aligning math skills to Common Core and leveling up in a way that's really beautiful. And I looked at it and I got super jealous because we do design. Design at the highest level in colleges is still something that they're grappling with. How do we assess this, and how is this portfolio compared to this one? And if we're doing architecture, how do you put a letter grade on that, or how do you give credit for where you're falling? So one of the things that we really looked at is, instead of trying to get credit specifically in high schools for the work that the students are doing, having our badges be looking towards the next level. So we trust that in your high school, you should be doing what you need to do to graduate and get your degree. But alongside that, there's so many other things that can be done to make you a competitive candidate for colleges and for the next step. And so we're looking at badges as a way that will really serve our students lifelong. So even if, 5 years out of high school, you're looking for a job, the grade that you got or the credit that you got on your high school transcript, nobody's even looking at that anymore. But if we create a badge that translates and is still relevant at that point in their life, then I think that we've done our job.
Well, it really picks up on very much what you're talking about. And I think as a field and after school, for many years, we've had this discussion of what are appropriate outcomes? What do we actually think we can and should be doing, and what can we measure in some manner? And I've been thinking of the words that you've been using between skills, competencies, participation, achievement, and those. I really love the discussion of having the working groups that hopefully have a variety of end users, but also think of very much of the earner and what they value, but then also the other side of what can be valued. And I guess more than a comment than a question, I would love to continue to hear that a variety of people are involved in that, because our values shift depending on our needs and on our expectations. And the potential for something to become you value what you measure versus what you value and what you view as accomplishment can be a moving target depending on the community that you're in and the own values and perspectives that you have. So I think that ongoing discussion is nuanced, and it probably has a big impact in terms of both how badges are valued, but also how they're used and who uses them and what they see in that. And I'm thinking here of sometimes, as you discuss, some of the very small providers who are going to have a hard time describing what it is, and they know they're doing something valuable, but they still struggle to put that into words. And I love the boldness of this, that just says, let's go for it. But that there's probably some learnings in there that would be useful both for this, but also more broadly, actually, as we think about what we want for children in particular.
So I'm going to ask as a final question. Does anyone else have anything very pressing? As a final question, because you all are on the frontier of the badge movement, and we in New York have some small initiatives percolating, and what are the sort of one or two key learnings that you would share with us as we look to the future and the potentials of digital badges?
Involve your library.
And maybe I'll pass it on and think about my second one.
Not really. So I think just building on what you were just talking about, the idea that badges have different affordances and that they can be used in different ways, and recognizing that badges actually are also cumulative. So it's very difficult to understand what a value, I'm really hesitant when I talk about value of badges, because remember if you're taking the earner's perspective, there's no way of understanding that these 30 different participation badges that they just earned over the course of 2 years won't play a significant role in their lives, 2 years down the road. So what it does is provide information about who they are and where their interests might lie. And there's almost no way to value that, right? And this is where I get all weepy about the concept of badges, but the idea that recognizing that everybody's playing a role, there are all these roles, and there's no way to say one badge is so much more valuable than another badge. So that's what I'm going to leave you with.
And to build on that, my husband is an avid cycler, and he, I told this story in Dallas, but he was part of this tour of Sufferlandia where he was like earning a badge, earning multiple badges on a bike trainer, and it was like insane the amount of effort that he put into earning these cycling badges for people that he's never seen before in his life, all over the country doing these same crazy courses, like on a trainer in his kitchen or in his garage over a finite, period in time. But once he earned like all 10 badges for the cycling thing, he was ecstatic, and it was something that he could put on Strava and tell his friends about. And I didn't even know that this was happening, like in terms of like my personal life and my my personal life and my work life converging, but he was totally into it, and his friends were into it, and I was like, wow, people really do care about badges, like really, really grown people. So anyway, that was one thing, just building on what Carla was saying. If nobody else knew it but he and his like cycling friends, like they cared. But from an implementation standpoint, I say involve your attorneys like from the beginning, because I lived in this, especially if you're thinking about data sharing, and to your point about credits and what as a city, what do you want badges to mean for New York? I think involve the attorneys now and have them thinking about how you want to implement and why it matters, because there's also the question we touched upon earlier about who's not earning badges, and people care about that too, like in terms of who's getting left behind. So your attorneys can help you think about that in ways you hadn't even thought of. And then the second thing I will say is identify your champions early. If we hadn't been thinking about the DOE conversation, but who are the 800-pound gorillas who really get this and want to help move it forward and help scale it, because people respect those people now, and they'll be the ones to help, I think, carry it forward in the future.
I got lucky being last. I had a little chance to decide what I thought my 2 takeaways were, or my 2 big points. I think one is realizing that badges are in development and in process, and so not expecting that what badges are now is necessarily what they're going to be a year from now or 5 years from now, but this is really, it's a messy making process. And so not to sort of wait until things look a little more figured out, but instead to sort of jump in and just start where you are. That's kind of the approach that we've taken at the Cooper Hewitt, and I think because of that we've learned so much but also benefited so much, and that's been great. And then I think the second thing is related, but don't start by looking at understanding badges and figuring out what they already are, but thinking about what your organization's vision is, what you want to accomplish down the road, and what's important to you. I think badges are really not an end, they're really a means to an end, and so the way that they get implemented and thoughtfully utilized is starting with your goals and then working backwards.
And I'm going to add my second point, and it dovetails nicely with Halima, which you just said. But from the funders' perspective, it is clear that badges are going to be something. There is so much momentum behind this, and now is the time to get in and get involved because you can really shape what it is. Yeah. We're just starting to build out the ecosystem, which is why there are so many unanswered questions. But we really need everyone's help in answering these questions because we think badges can be really powerful for transforming learning and for building effective workforce pipelines, which I know we're all interested in doing.
Well, I want to thank our speakers, and I also want to thank Leah Gilliam of the Hive NYC, who helped organize this session, Hollis, who did a fabulous job, Janet Kelly, of Workforce Funders Group, and of course Philanthropy New York. And I think we should give a huge round of applause to